Hey there, and welcome to this lesson on motion tracking 2D and 3D, as well as stabilization within After Effects. I'm Cameron, I'm your instructor, and we are going to start this series of lessons with the 2D tracker. And what is the 2D tracker? Well, the 2D tracker is very powerful. It's been inside of After Effects for many, many, many years, and it can track things inside your footage so that you can apply things to your footage to make them look more interesting. So, in this particular case, we are going to apply some interesting looking graphics to this footage right here. I'll go ahead and preview this, and we're just going to do about 3 seconds of it so you can get an idea. But this is just some footage of a maple leaf shot. And it's interesting because it actually goes out of focus right here. It's in focus, goes out of focus, which can cause havoc on tracking sometimes. So it'll be interesting to see what happens on this one. What else is interesting about this is that the leaf actually bends upwards. So here it's pretty flat and it bends towards the camera. And it also, because the wind is blowing on it, it has a little bit of a fluctuation in it, which tells me that we need to track a few different things. So in general, when you're tracking motion inside of After Effects, you can track a few different ways with a few different techniques. What you have to do to track is you always have to double click your footage down here in the timeline or up here in the project window to open up the layer window. So you're not able to track here within our composition window. So we just go down here to our timeline, double click, and that opens up this layer. As you can see here, it says layer maple leaf. So it opens up the footage in the layer window. Here's our composition. Here's our layer window. Something else to keep in mind is it's always best to be full res when you're tracking. So we'll make sure we're on full resolution here, and we're going to just track about 3 seconds. Maybe we'll track a little bit longer. We'll see. So we'll go back into our layer footage here. And when we track, as I mentioned just previously, you can track different things. You can track position, you can track scale, and you can track rotation when working with the 2D tracker. So all we have to do to track is go up here, and there's 4 different buttons, and we will cover all these buttons, but 2D tracking is track motion. So our motion source is our layer footage, which is here. So that's all good. And we don't need to mess with any of this stuff yet. I'll show you in just a second what happens. So with our footage selected here, we're at the layer window here, we select track motion, and boom, some options pop up here. We also have a tracker that shows up down here. So we'll start with just a very simple track, and you can see that it defaults to the position track. So when we add things like rotation or scale, there's additional track points added, but because we're working with just position, we only need 1 track point added to begin with. So what we're going to do is we want to hover over this track point, and you can see as I kind of move over it, the cursor changes to a move tool, back to the cursor, back to the move tool. And then here we have like a little anchor point thing that pops up here, right? So if I was to click and drag this little plus sign here, it's going to move it wherever I put it in the layer window. But what we want to do is we want to make sure that we're just inside this outer box and click, and that way we're dragging the entire box. If I let go, you can see it's got the outer box, the inner box, and the plus symbol. So again, I'm going to click just inside here. I'm going to drag, and you can see that it zooms in on our footage here. Okay, so I want to find a good point that I can track, and maybe this little black spot. You can see a little bit of black right there. It's always good to have as much contrast as possible when tracking. It's also a good idea that I find to expand the boxes just slightly. You don't have to. Depending on what your footage is, the bigger this box is expanded, the more the After Effects is going to look at the surrounding footage to calculate a track. So essentially, the bigger this box is, the longer the track time is going to take. So typically with tracking here in 2D motion, it's sometimes trial and error to get a good track. Back over here in our track window, and I should mention, if you don't see this window, you need to go up here to your window tracker to make sure that the tracker is a pop-up, it's the panel's open and you can see it. So I just happen to have it open and I brought it over here. A lot of times it'll show up on the right side here. So again, here we are in the tracker window. There's some options here. We're going to mess with edit target in a minute. Options, click that. You're going to see it says it's tracker 1. It's using the built-in tracker. Sometimes if you have Mocha, it'll ask if you want to use Mocha, or if you have a third-party tracking system, it may ask if you want to use that. A lot of times defaults to luminance. I think on maybe this one, at saturation, I got a better track. But by default, it's always going to be luminance. Subpixel positioning, I believe, is on, and this is all default material. So for whatever reason, I had saturation selected. Sometimes if I'm having a very hard time tracking, I'll try checking these different boxes to see if things improve. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. The 2D tracker inside of After Effects is very temperamental. I'll just say that. So we're on our settings. We have analyze, okay? Analyze. This means analyze one frame back, analyze backwards. Just if you click this, it's like playing backwards. It's going to analyze backwards. So if for whatever reason we started our cursor here at 3 seconds, and that's where we found our tracking point, we could analyze backwards this way, and we could also analyze forwards this way. I just happen to be starting at 0. You don't have to start at 0. Again, clicking here, it says analyze forward. It's just going to play through it. And this button is analyze one frame forward. So we're just going to go one frame at a time. If you're having a really tricky track, you may have to analyze one frame at a time and reposition the tracker if that's the case. So let's actually just click one frame forward, and we can see it's still on the track. Seems to be doing okay. So a lot of times what I'll do, and you can see the keyframes are being added down here on the timeline. So I'm going to go ahead and hit analyze. Sometimes it can move very quickly, and you can see it quickly gets off track. So let's go ahead and do that. And this one's actually doing pretty good. Oh, there it goes. So you can see there it jumped off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back up here, and I'm just going to use page down on my keyboard to find when that track loses itself, which is right there. So the little black speck that we were following before is pretty much gone at this point. So it's almost, it's a matter of eyeing it to make sure, okay, does that look right? Back a frame, forward a frame. Yeah, it looks about right. So let's go ahead and move this one. And I'll just go back and forth and kind of make sure they look okay. Again, these are way off. So I'm going to click on my timeline down here. I'm going to hit U, and I'm just going to go ahead and delete these keys here. So back up here in our window, I'm going to go back up a frame. You can see it's kind of, that's where it should be. And it jumps all the way down here. So we should be back up in here. Looks about right. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. A lot of times you can cheat and get away with some things. So we're out of keyframes here. So let's go ahead and track forward one frame. And then again, see, it's because it's going out of focus. It's having a really hard time. So this is a very tricky track. I love that word, tricky track. But it seems to be doing okay. Now I could just click play again and move forward, but because this is so tricky right now, I'm just going to do it frame by frame and make sure things just, now see, it's getting questionable right there. I think it needs to go up just a hair. There's our black spot. And yep. Okay, let's track forward. Okay, so there we are. We're 3 seconds into it. I think we've got an okay track. And let's just, let me show you how you would apply this. Just for this particular example, we are going to use a graphic. So let me pull that in real quick here. So I've got my graphic in here. This is from a digital pack that Motion Science sells, and I'm by no means saying that you need to buy this, but I'm going to use this for an example. So when we have a tracked piece of footage like we have here, we could apply this track directly to the footage here. And if I jump back in the composition, you're going to see, if I turn this on, there it is, and I back it up, you're going to see here is the piece of footage I want to track into the shot. And you could apply the tracking data to this footage directly, but a much smarter way to approach this is to apply the tracking data to a null object. So we need to create a new null object. And there's our null object. And we're going to make sure that we're back here in the layer panel. If you're in the composition panel like this, you can see I can't access any of this tracking data for whatever reason. I have to go back into my layer window. From here, I have my tracked data, but I haven't applied it to anything. It's just a tracking data that's sitting down here on my timeline. And something I should point out is you can also see right here in the confidence, that's how confident it is on the track, right? So somewhere in here, we get down to 82%, saying, this may not be a good track. 81, not so great. Typically, if you go below 80%, you need to reanalyze. And there we go, 70%. I think that's where I started tracking it myself because we got down to a 70%. So now we're back to 100% confidence. It's saying, hey, I got this, right? So something to keep in mind is to look at that. Here we're 100% for quite a while, 98, 99, saying, hey, I got it pretty good. So anyways, now we need to apply our tracking data here to a null object. So we need to go up to edit target and we need to select our null object. And there's our null. And you see some other things here. I have some things hidden on my timeline from some tests I did. So if you see, you see a second null and you're saying, where is it on the timeline? It's hidden, right? So don't even think about that stuff. Don't even look at that stuff. So here we are, we've selected null object 3, it's layer 2. We're gonna say, okay. So that's our target. And now we want to apply our tracking data to that. So we're gonna hit apply and it's gonna pop up and say, okay, do you wanna apply it to the X and Y or to X only or Y only? Typically, you're gonna be applying it to X and Y. I don't know that I've ever actually applied just to X or Y only, maybe on a few occasions. Yes, apply it, click OK. And you're going to see that the null object here now has the data applied to it, right? So if I turn off this footage here, you can see there's our null and it's just moving right along with that leaf. Looks really nice, right? So it's tracked to it, it's looking great. So now what I can do is I can go back to my digi-square and I can say, hey, I want this digi-square to recognize this null data and follow that null. And the easy way to do that is just to parent. And the trick is to hold down shift. So if I just say parent to the null, nothing changed. The digi-square didn't move. It is tracked to that, but it's not taking on like the rotation, that kind of stuff. If I hold down shift and then parent, watch what happens to my digi-square. It moves right up there where I need it to be. And I'm going to change the mode to screen. And there it is. All right, so if I preview this, there it is. Awesome. So it looks pretty cool. And if I was just doing a single point track, this would work, right? But I want to make it look even more interesting. I want it to take on the rotation of the leaf. I want it to take on the scale because the scale does slightly change as that leaf comes towards the camera. Okay, so if this was a completely flat shot, a 1-point track is all we need. If maybe the camera's moving across these leaves or up and down, the leaves aren't moving, it's completely flat, a 1-point track will do us justice. But for this particular case, we want to do a more detailed track. And to do that, we need to track position, rotation, and scale. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this on screen, but we're going to turn off our transfer mode. We're going to go ahead. Actually, we're going to leave transfer mode. We're going to reset our position. We're going to just go ahead and Get rid of all this data in here. We'll leave our null here. And actually, we'll just change the name of this to tracking null. So now we're going to go back into our footage and we're going to track for position, scale, and rotation. And upon looking at this closer, I can tell that the initial track point here at the top is not quite right. So I am going to delete that. And we're just going to start brand new. So we're going to say track motion. We want to track the position, the rotation, and the scale because this leaf has a motion where it kind of pops up from like this anchor point here and it kind of bends towards the camera. And we can simulate that with some scale. So we're going to track all three. And we're also going to go into our options and we're going to say that we want to stop tracking if the confidence is below 80%. So this means that After Effects will stop tracking the motion if the confidence of the track on either one of these points goes below 80%. So we're going to say okay. And let's zoom in here and let's go ahead and move track point 2 right here. And we're going to expand the outer box and we'll expand the smaller box. And let's move this track point to a different point. Maybe let's try this little guy right here. And I held down the space bar to move up here in the footage. I'm going to take the box here, expand the box a little bit, expand this one. And we've got both track points and we're going to go ahead and click Analyze Forward. And if the confidence on either one of these drops below 80%, it should stop. And there we go. So there it stopped. And if I open this up, tracker 1 and tracker 2, confidence on tracker 1 got to 63.9, tracker 2 is 73.2. If I do page up, we're at 87 and 82, 91 and 80, 80, 88. Okay, so pretty much right here, we need to fix both track points. So let's back up. And I like to just kind of look at what's going on here. So it looks like a lot of motion blur all of a sudden stepped in. And that's probably what's throwing us off. And I'm going to back up one frame, forward. That seems okay. Maybe in there. And we'll move forward another frame. And you can see this is where it really starts to get lost. I'm going to stay on this first tracking point here. And try and get it figured out here. And I can see it's very blurry, which again is going to throw off the track. So I might try there and just see if it can pick up a track. Actually, there's still a lot of motion blur going on, so we're gonna go back into here. And just doing this all by hand, and it should work out okay. I'm gonna just back it up here. There's just a lot of motion blur there. Looks like maybe it slowed down a bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and back up here and go down here to the second track point. And you can see it's really off there. So it should be up in here. So let's go ahead and just hit, let's zoom out a little bit here and let's go ahead and track forward and see what happens. Again, this top point kind of got out of whack. And there's no right way to do this. It's just whatever works. And there we go. So we made it through the rest of our track. I only wanted to go to 3 seconds. And it looks like everything ended up tracking okay. What I'm going to do is zoom in here and just go through this and make sure it looks, yeah, definitely on the second point here it works. Let's focus a little bit more on the track 1. Make sure we're good to go here. Yeah, that works for me. So we're going to back out and we're going to make sure our target is set to tracking null. Tracking null, layer 2 is our target. Okay. And let's go ahead and apply the X and Y. Okay. And there we go. And now our tracking null has position, scale, and rotation all applied to it. So by holding down Shift and the parent pick whip, the DigiSquare anchor point right here is going to be parented to the null center anchor point. And boom, there we go. And now, because I parented the DigiSquare to the null, and there's no anchor point data, there's no position data, there's no scale data or rotation data, I can easily open up my DigiSquare and I can position it how I want it to be. Somewhere right there, I'm going to scale it up just a little bit so it covers the entire leaf, and maybe just rotate it just a little bit. And let's play it back and see how it looks. I think that looks pretty cool. I dig it. That is motion tracking with position, scale, and rotation inside of After Effects. Let's move on.